far, Scott has done a great job with taking us through the importance of mental health, anxiety overload, and dealing with depression. And that dealing with depression part for me is a tough one. And I'll get into that a little bit later. And today we get to talk about something that I'm sure we have all struggled with a time or two, probably even more. And as I was preparing this sermon, God revealed to me even that I struggle with this. And though I know that I'm not perfect and I've gotten a lot better, but it's a critical spirit and a negative mindset. Now, before we get going, I want to ask you guys by a show of hands, how many of you guys know someone who has a critical spirit, or overly judgmental, or a negative mindset? I knew it. Okay, all right? 2 hands. Now, how many of you don't have to show me your hands, because this is a little more sensitive. How many of you have a negative mindset or a critical spirit? You don't have to show your hands. We got judgmental people sitting in the room. So let's define what a critical spirit is. And this is the first line in your notes this morning. A critical spirit is a negative attitude that seeks to tear down others rather than build them up. And some of the adjectives that go with hand in hand with the critical spirit are closed off. Let's see. Harsh, judgmental, proud, snobby, insecure, prone to comparison, passive aggressive. And maybe some of these adjectives that I just went through resonate with you. And maybe you haven't identified that you have a critical spirit yet or a negative mindset. But some of these adjectives really start resonating deep down, and you're like, oh. And maybe you begin to think, do I have a critical spirit? Am I judgmental? Do I have a negative mindset? So people with the critical spirit tend to live in the negative, look for flaws, complain or criticize constantly, have little control over what they say, and are temperamental, lean towards gossip, character assassination, conflict, and harming someone. See the glass, right? And I got a glass here. How do you see this glass? Is it half empty or half full? Right? So they see the glass as half empty. Well, I'll use the jar later. Don't worry about that. Sense failure in others more than in themselves. They're judgmental. So a thought pattern, and I want you to think about those words, a thought pattern that tends to point out a critical spirit is a negative view of one's own circumstances, the behavior of others, and life. Which, ironically, I think leads us into what is a negative mindset. And this is for your notes. A negative mindset is a pattern of thinking negatively about yourself or your surroundings. Does that resonate with anybody? I mean, I know for myself it resonates hard. And these patterns of thinking often include assumptions that are wrong. Oof. Unrealistic self-criticism. Oh, that's a deep one. Denial of reality. Thinking that it's all your fault. Blaming yourself for something that you didn't even do. Holding yourself responsible for something that you are not even responsible for. Does that resonate with anybody? I know I've done that a time or two. I'm speaking to somebody, right? Putting negative labels on yourself. Things like, I'm an idiot. I'm dumb. I'm worthless. And those thoughts, man, those are super painful thoughts that can keep you trapped, right? These thoughts can keep you trapped in this cycle. And I'm telling you that some of these problems, I jumped too far ahead. So to me, this really sounds like distorted or false perception. And I got a picture for you guys. I want you guys to take a look at. Now, do you guys see like the wreath pattern? Now, do any of you guys, by show of hands, do you guys see the rays of light emitting from the center of the circle outwards? You guys see that? Do you know that those rays aren't even there? It's something that your mind is making up. So your perception of reality can actually be wrong. Think about that for a second. Like your eyes can lie to you. So we've just determined that your perception can lie. In other words, your brain can perceive things that are not really there. Now, some of the problems that having a negative mindset can produce, these are problems, so these are the fruit. This is the fruit that a negative mindset can produce. Poor self-esteem, anxiety, depression, a false sense of reality, fear, worry. And I'm hoping that as we go through these lists and we start hearing these things that I put down, we're starting to begin to really think, man, maybe I have a negative mindset. Maybe I'm really critical. And I believe that these two things are, the critical spirit and the negative mindset are interdependent and closely related to our mental health, whether it's anxiety, depression, fear, worry, false perception, so on. You guys get the idea. It's all connected. So this series, How Are You Doing? And we get to get into the depths of all of this stuff that's really interconnected. It's not just one thing that we got to work on, right? It's all, and sometimes that can be hard. And I know for me lately, my anxiety and my stress have been really high. They've caused me to be super critical, which is odd to me because having a critical spirit leads to a negative mindset, and having a negative mindset can produce anxiety, fear, worry, depression, and all of these things can lead me to having a critical spirit. So you can almost get stuck in this never-ending loop if you can't recognize it. And this is a loop that I have been stuck in. And God used me putting this sermon together. I told Pastor Scott, I said, dude, I don't know if I want to do a sermon ever again, because every time I've done a sermon, man, I've had to change. This is uncomfortable and this sucks. But this is God's way of opening wounds and healing things within me. Now, I don't say all of this so that you can go home and you can call John and say, John, I know what's wrong with you. That's tempting, isn't it? See, I believe that God is using me to allow you to see these things in your own life, just like he used me building this lesson to see him in my own life. See, I wish I had a lot more time to be able to teach you guys every single thing that I learned, because I learned so much. Some of you guys are already thinking about the football game that's going to go on pretty soon. So having a critical spirit can actually blind us to the grace and the beauty that God continues to give to us daily. Think about that for a second. We get blinded And we're unable to be grateful for the things that God gives us because we're so stuck in this reality of critical spirit and negative mindset. And so recently I started meeting with a counselor because I'm like, man, I need a little bit more work on myself. I'm not a second-rate Christian because I'm seeing a counselor. You're not a second-rate Christian if you need to go see a counselor, right? I believe that God has provided these people in our lives so that we can lean on them, so that we can heal through things that are deep, deep wounds. You know, and I remember a few weeks ago we were sitting in a staff meeting and we were talking about depression, and I broke down. I started bawling. I started bawling because I have this wound, this trauma around depression. My mom was depressed for most of my childhood. She had this depression that would make her go into her room, put up dark curtains, and sleep all day long. And so depression robbed me of my relationship with my mother. Now see where I'm gonna go here? I'm gonna go with this, right? This trauma that depression produced for me made me become critical towards people who experience depression. So trauma can produce a critical spirit, right? And so meeting with this counselor, I'm trying to figure out, like, what's all this stuff that I'm going through? And we pinpointed this word, fear. I'm afraid. So it's possible that fear can produce a critical spirit. So now we have fear and we have trauma that are producing a critical spirit. I definitely need some help, right? You know, and here's this idea that, like, I can't change anything if I don't know what's wrong. You can't change anything if you don't know what's wrong. And so today I want to challenge you that if you've experienced any of these things, to go deeper. Go deeper within yourself. Figure out, why am I feeling this way? Can I pinpoint it to trauma? Can I pinpoint it to fear? Like, I'm super critical because I'm afraid of the way that it looks. Right? If it doesn't match up to the standards of all my 34-year-old friends on Facebook, I'm super critical, and I'm like, man, I should be buying a house right now. Right? I should have a lot of money in my savings account right now. And what am I doing? I'm comparing myself to others and the way that my life looks. So I want to get into some scripture because I do believe that scripture identifies a lot of stuff, right? Like, God is so divine that he gave us this book, this Bible, that we are able to identify things within other people that resonate within ourselves so that we can begin to make a change in our own lives. And so before we begin to identify some characteristics, because let's be honest, right? Identifying wrong characteristics or critical spirit in other people is easier than identifying it in ourselves. Think about that. And so I want to get into, before we get into this identifying a critical spirit in other people, I want to read a scripture from Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 through 5. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eyes and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when this whole time there's a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite. First, take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. So work on the things within yourself before you go work on the things of other people. And the fact that, man, when you're criticizing, when you're judging, that same judgment is going to be given to you. So let's go into some identifying people. Matthew 21, verse 23 through 27, and I believe these are all in your notes if you guys want to follow along. Jesus entered the temple courts, and while he was teaching, the chief priests and the elders of the people came to him. "By what authority are you doing these things?" they asked. "And who is giving you this authority?" Jesus replied, "I will also ask you one question. If you answer me, I will tell you by what authority I am doing these things. John's baptism, where did it come from? Was it from heaven or was it from human origin?" And they discussed it among themselves and said, "Well, if we say it's from heaven, then he will ask, then why don't you believe in me? But if we say it's human origin, well, we're afraid of what they all hold that John was a prophet." So they answered Jesus, "We don't know." Then he said, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I am doing these things. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. By the same measure that you're judged, you will be judged." Right? And Jesus gives us that kind of example. He says, "Man, I'm going to turn this around for you." Okay, so let's go a little bit deeper. In John chapter 8, verses 2 through 11, at dawn, he appeared again in the temple courts, and this is Jesus, where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law, the Pharisees, brought a woman caught in adultery, and they made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery, and the law of Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" See, they were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing Jesus. So at the expense of this woman, they're questioning Jesus. The humility, everything, right? Could you imagine being that woman standing before this big group and they're being super critical of Jesus? They're just trying to catch Jesus, but they're using this woman, right? At the expense of this woman, man. But Jesus bent down and started to write in the ground with his finger, and they kept on questioning him. And he straightened up and said to them, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw the stone at her." Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away, one at a time. The older ones first, only until Jesus was left, with the woman still standing there. And Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you." Jesus declared, "Go now and leave your life of sin." And this is the next one. Our critical spirit, so this is for you to fill in. Our critical spirit doesn't care who we hurt. You know, and I think about the words that Jesus told this woman when he says, "Then neither do I condemn you. Go now and leave this life of sin." So when Jesus spoke to people, he built them up. But when the Pharisees spoke to people, when they spoke to Jesus, they were trying to tear him down. And this isn't going to come up because this is something I added, because that's what I like to do sometimes. Romans chapter 8, 5 through 7, it says, "Those who live according to the flesh have their minds set on what is the flesh and what it desires. But those who live in accordance with the Spirit have their minds set on what the Spirit desires. The mind that is governed by the flesh is death, but the mind that is governed by the Spirit of life is life and peace. The mind governed by the flesh is hostile to God, and it does not submit to God's law, nor can it do so." So I can't really live under submission to the two greatest commandments. Do you guys know what the two greatest commandments are? Love the Lord your God, and then love your neighbor as yourself. So love God and love people. And I can't do that if I'm living in the flesh. The Bible tells me that clearly. It says, the mind governed by the flesh is hostile to God, and it does not submit to God's law, nor can it do so. So I can't love God and I can't love my neighbor if I'm living in the flesh. And do you think that I'm living in the flesh if I have a critical spirit or a negative mindset? Think about that for a second. I'm living in the flesh because I'm so focused on the things that are around me. And God is internal. God is eternal. But the things that I'm negative of and the things that I'm critical of are external, temporary. And here's a really cold reality. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, the high priest, the scribes, and the lawyers, those are the ones that everybody who reads the Gospels love to hate. We hate these guys and we judge them hard, and then we often think of people that they remind us of. And the last thing that we do is we associate ourselves with them. Right? That's the last thing that we want to do. But the same judgmental spirit that we have for the Pharisees is the same that they have for Christ. Like, to them, they're justified. To them, they're not doing anything wrong. And so when we're judging people, we're justified. But why don't you pull the plank out of your eye before you go to your brother and help them with theirs? So it's important to distinguish between constructive criticism, which aims to provide helpful feedback for improvement, and unproductive. See, constructive criticism can be valuable when offered in a supportive and respectful manner. But a critical spirit often lacks these qualities and can be detrimental to both the individual holding it and those around them. I want to show you guys something really quick. So I've seen this illustration done for something else, and I was like, man, how relevant is this to having a critical spirit and a negative mindset? So this jar is going to represent like our thoughts and our minds, right? Does everybody see the water? It's all clear. I'm not going to turn water into wine today. And this food dye, one drop represents a negative spirit or a critical mindset. So you can see how one little simple thing dilutes everything. Right? How one simple, it's contagious. Right? Like, if I'm around people that are negative or even if I'm negative or I'm being critical, like it rubs off on people. Now, let me see, I'm gonna get the next part here. So I would hope that I could put a drop of water in there to really turn it clear again, right? To make it better, right? That's more than a drop. But does it help? Doesn't help at all, does it? But when I pour in a lot, right, it begins to really matter. It really begins to change. But man, that's a lot of work, isn't it? That's a lot of work. When I think of the grand scheme of things, man, in order to make this clear again, I have to put so much into it. And that's where Jesus comes in. Right? If you think about, for me, the things that Jesus has done in my life, and I've told you guys before, I should be in prison right now with a year left in my sentence. And the things that Jesus can do for you, the healing that Jesus can do, and sometimes it's not comfortable. Sometimes it's painful. There's tears that are shed. There are wounds that are reopened. Like that moment when I was sitting in the staff meeting and I started crying because it hit me that, man, I have trauma with depression. So when my wife is depressed and I'm telling her, you can't be depressed, it's impossible, you choose to be depressed. I'm being super critical and I'm dismissing what she really feels. And depression isn't an option. And so I had to really challenge myself. I had to start pouring into this wound to start making this a little bit better. Little by little by little by little. Right? And so it takes a lot of time. This one thing that happened when I was a kid is affecting me now at 34 years old. It's affecting my relationships. I'm going to leave this up here. So that remember that changing a critical spirit and a negative mindset is an ongoing process, and it may take time. Be patient with yourself and celebrate the progress that you make along the way. Consistent effort and a commitment to self-improvement can lead to a positive change in your mindset. Now, I've kind of developed, how many of you guys have heard of the 12 steps? All right. Well, I'm in recovery. I've got over 5 years sober, and I'm like, man, because I think Pastor Scott was really onto something when he said that we can actually become addicted to this stuff that we experience, like this anxiety. I can become addicted to anxiety. I can become addicted to depression. I can become addicted to having a critical spirit. I can become addicted to having a negative mindset, so much that it consumes all of me. And it affects every single relationship that I have. And if you guys ask my family, you guys are gonna hear that I can be critical. And I can be negative. And most of the time, the reason why I'm critical is because I fear what it looks like. Just like the Pharisees feared what it all looked like. No, this doesn't look right. This doesn't match up to what we're teaching. This can't be right. Right? I'm so focused on the outward that I'm missing everything on the inside. I'm missing the relationship that I should be building, and I'm tearing it apart because I'm so critical. And so step one, admit that you are struggling with a critical spirit and a negative mindset, and acknowledge the impact that it has on your life and well-being, right? The first step is admitting that I have a problem, right? I got to acknowledge it in order to change it. Because if I don't acknowledge it, man, it's not going anywhere. Thing's living with me for the rest of my life. Step 2, came to believe that change is possible through Christ and that you have the capacity to develop a more positive and constructive mindset. And if you guys turn over your notes, these steps are in the back. Just so you know, you can take them home with you. I haven't wrote a whole recovery program around it. Step 3, make a decision to turn away from negative thoughts and behaviors and commit to cultivating a more optimistic and hopeful outlook. Right? Step 1, I can't. Step 2, God can. Step 3, it's my job to let him. Step 4, take a fearless and moral inventory of your critical and negative tendencies, identifying the patterns and triggers that contribute to this mindset. There's a lot of work that I have to do, but if I'm willing to change this, and I'm going to be honest with you guys, I haven't done this yet in my own life, but I might. I might have to try to take myself through these 12 steps to really get healed, right? I got to put my money where my mouth is, right? I got to do what I'm suggesting to do. Step 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being, to another person, the exact nature of our critical spirit and negative mindset, sharing how it has affected your life and relationships. Step 6, be ready to let go of these negative traits and attitudes, giving them to God, understanding that they no longer serve your well-being. Step 7, humbly ask for support and guidance from God, a therapist, a counselor, or a support group to help you work through your critical and negative mindset. And I so far know that this is working because this is something that I have done. Step 8, make a list of those you have harmed or affected with your critical spirit and negative mindset, and be willing to make amends where appropriate without causing further harm. Step 9, make direct amends to those you have harmed, where possible, in a way that is respectful and conducive to healing. Step 10, continue to take personal inventory. Promptly admit when you slip into a critical or negative mindset and take steps to correct it. Step 11, seek through prayer, meditation, as well as self-reflection to deepen your relationships with God, praying that he shows you a much better way to live in his will and not ours. And step 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, carry this message of hope and transformation to others struggling with a critical spirit and a negative mindset. And practice these principles in all our thoughts and actions. Now, if you are struggling with a critical spirit or negative mindset, as we have the worship team come up, and I'll dab because I said I was going to. I got to tell Pastor Scott, if he's watching, Backstreet's back, all right? No, if you guys are struggling with a critical spirit and a negative mindset, like, I want you guys to know that you're not alone. And I know that sometimes for myself, when I was going through this trial for this last month and preparing this, a lot of like challenge and challenging myself and pain, I felt like I was alone. But the more that I reached out to other people, the more that I talked to other people, the more that I sought help, the better that it got. And I hope that maybe if you are struggling with a critical spirit or or negative mindset, that you can take this booklet home, just like I get to take it home, and I get to practice these steps. I get to practice a better way of life so that my relationships can be as whole as God intended them to be. I get to focus on things of the Spirit rather than things of the flesh, things that really matter. Because when it really comes down to it, it's about the relationships in my life, right? The relationship that I have with God. I think when I think about the Bible as a whole, it's God pursuing a relationship with us from the beginning of time to the end of time. And I want to invite you guys up that if you're struggling with a critical spirit and negative mindset, we'll have our prayer team.